thought you'd gotten rid of us, didn't you?
Finally on DVD, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
God save the Queen, our son.
The Sex Pistols star in the definitive punk rock movie.
The most notorious rock and roll band in the old world.
The NME call it the greatest rock and roll film ever. The Great Rock and Roll Swindle on DVD at last.
Hey there, welcome back to Dave's Movie Diary. I'm talking about The Great Rock and Roll Swindle from 1980, documenting the short-lived reign of the Sex Pistols at the top of punk culture in the UK for sure, and in other parts of the world. Wow, this one really hits a lot of nostalgic memories for me. I first saw it sometime in the late 80s, or mid to late 80s, with mates, and absolutely loved it. I've probably seen it another, I don't know how many times over the years, lost count. Sometimes properly. I've only sat down and watched it properly maybe 5 times. A lot of times it was just on in the background with mates because they had everything we found fascinating back then. I'm talking about when I was 14, 15, 16, that kind of age, so mid to late 80s. Yeah, my obsession with punk rock probably started even earlier. I can recall early 80s seeing an episode of The Goodies, in Australia anyway, in the UK, well-known comedy trio. They every episode they put out had some sort of link to cultural events of the day. And in the late 70s, they did an episode about punks, and I can remember not knowing what the hell was going on. Punks were featured in that. It was about the way that journalists covered punk rock and the whole look, safety pins, green hair, leather jackets, total chaos. It just made no sense to me as a 10-year-old. Then in 1984, I went to the UK with my folks. I can still remember like the first or second day we got there, going on a tour around London on one of those double-decker buses up the top, and seeing all the punks there. This is the real punks with the green mohawks, leather jackets, piercings everywhere, and coming from pretty staid, boring Australia at the time, these guys were utterly fascinating, and that just cemented my intrigue with these guys. And then, later on, discovering more about the Sex Pistols in particular was pretty exciting. So by high school, a couple of years later, I had a mate whose older brother knew a lot about the Sex Pistols. And as was the case, a lot of these stories got passed down, and everything about them sounded dangerous and fascinating. Just the names, Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious, the fact that they swore in their music, the chaos, the music itself. And then finding out that Sid was already long dead by then after overdosing following the death of his girlfriend, which he allegedly had a part in. It all felt incredibly dark and exciting to 14 or 15-year-old me. Then on top of that, I heard the actual music that they put out. Never mind the bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols. What a great album. Still stands the test of time. It was so raw. And it was so surprising to me that the mythology wasn't even the best part, that the music was incredible. I still think that album sounds absolutely ferocious and timeless in a way. Great lyrics, Johnny Rotten's sneering vocals, Steve Jones' great guitar. Sid Vicious didn't even play on the album, and apparently they used to unplug his bass guitar a lot because he was that bad. So, but he was there more for the vibe, the look, the danger element. Anyway, the film itself, pure punk chaos. It's a bit of a mess. It's all over the place, as it should be. Directed by Adrian Temple, who's well known, particularly in the UK. I think he did commercials, maybe. He made other feature films, including Absolute Beginners with David Bowie in the mid-80s. He was always on the cutting edge of these sorts of movements. And this film is so inventive. It's it's definitely not a normal documentary. It's chaotic by design. It's a whole mix of things. Some fantastic live footage of the band playing. Some heaps of interviews throughout it. Some great animation to depict some of their more famous or infamous moments. Lots of staged comedy. Some additional musical numbers that were made just for the movie, but on top of everything, just complete absurdity wherever you look. The opening alone tells you exactly what kind of experience you're in for. It's a guy in a GIMP mask. So think Pulp Fiction. Think about the GIMP. This is the GIMP like 15 years before that. It's meant to be Malcolm McLaren inside there. I don't know if it is or not. You can hardly hear what he's saying, and that just sets the scene. So many unforgettable sequences. Like the whole film really is just all these unforgettable sequences put together. Most of them work, in my opinion. I really like the animated sequences. Things like the band arriving at the airport when they infamously, I think, swore at reporters, and one of them threw up, and it was all captured. And as Malcolm McLaren, the manager, wanted it to be, because it was all about the publicity. The music was a far distant second. And then hearing bizarre things in this, or seeing bizarre things like the disco version of Anarchy in the UK that appears in this film. It's pretty good, actually. Or watching Sid Vicious, just wearing a pair of undies in front of a mirror singing something else. Might have been Eddie Cochran or someone like that had that song in the 50s. It's not bad either. And then seeing him jump onto his motorbike, roaring along these country lanes, and eventually singing My Way near the end. It's just all completely insane, but very entertaining if you're into this kind of culture. Malcolm McLaren and the myth making. I mean, that's really what this film's all about. The film runs on two tracks. On one side, you've got Malcolm McLaren speaking directly to camera in 9 or 10 lessons, explaining how he essentially built the perfect punk band that couldn't play, didn't want them to play, was happy when they got banned, how he manipulated the record companies, and if you know anything about the story about the Sex Pistols, you know that they signed with three different record companies in the UK alone. They got fired from the first two, but not until they'd pocketed the money. Then they eventually signed with Virgin, Richard Branson's fledgling record label back in the day. He talks about how he created controversy deliberately and effortlessly with these guys. Like the famous interview on UK TV where Steve Jones just started swearing after he got goaded by the interviewer. There were actual stories the next day of people kicking in their TV screens. Like, this is 1976 in the UK. Things were still very conservative. It was very easy back then to court controversy and provoke. The whole thing was an elaborate business experiment led by McLaren. But then running alongside that, you've got this strange fictional side story involving Steve Jones, who was the guitarist of the band. He's acting like some sort of private detective trying to track McLaren down. And that's pretty funny as well. He's got this trench coat on and trying to act like a private eye. If you know anything about Steve Jones, it's just like the furthest thing from him that you can imagine. Anyway, it's interesting too because Johnny Rotten would have nothing to do with this film. He'd quit the band a year or so before they started making it. There's some great footage of the Pistols' last concert performance before their first split. They've since reformed a few times in the mid-90s and following that just to make money. There's some great footage of him just sitting there and saying to the audience in the US, ever get the feeling you've been cheated? and then just walking off the stage. This sort of stuff hadn't happened before. This sort of people were just had their heads blown off with this sort of thing. So it's just a document of what the punk manifesto was, and it was led by these guys. You know, you could argue quite successfully, probably, that other bands at the time were far superior in terms of musical ability, like the Clash, like the Damned, pretty much any other band, but it was the Sex Pistols that people remember because they had the image, they had the danger. They really didn't care. Some great punk footage in this. Some of this live footage still feels unlike anything else. Crowds doing the pogo. Sid Vicious reckons he invented it. I'm not sure he did, but this jumping up and down, bashing into each other, people spitting at each other, spitting at the band spitting back at them, people staggering around with notable injuries, fights breaking out. The boundary between the performer and the audience completely disappears. Just chaotic. And I know it's been replicated in other forms of music. The San Francisco Bay Area, sort of music from the late 70s, early 80s was similar. But this seemed to be the first time this had happened at this level and with this amount of people being genuinely shocked by it. So I think I've always been fascinated by punk because it just represented something completely different, aggressive, confrontational, dangerous. The Sex Pistols felt like a direct reaction against what they saw as bloated establishment rock at the time. Bands like Pink Floyd, Rod Stewart, disco. The whole point seemed to be tearing down everything respectable. And for a teenage kid discovering all this years later, that energy was still incredibly appealing. They got me at the right time. And I think a lot of it reflected the state of the UK at the time when this film was made. The economy was in all sorts of trouble. There was a lot of youth unemployment. There was genuine boredom, lack of opportunity. And you've got these guys coming out saying, especially in the year of the Jubilee, 25 years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. It was just perfect timing in 1977. And there's some fantastic footage of them on a boat playing their music and then the police coming up alongside. Malcolm McLaren getting arrested afterwards. Probably staged, but who cares? It's just great to watch. Watching all this footage again still brings back all those memories of being young and discovering this stuff for the first time. The chaos of the signing ceremony with A&M Records. The footage of them arriving to sign the contracts near Buckingham Palace, completely off their face, stumbling out of this car, struggling to even sign the contracts, then back to A&M Records, just trashing the place. Steve Jones getting way too friendly with one of the secretaries there. All sorts of madness happening. Sid Vicious stumbling around with a bleeding foot. Just you can't make this stuff up. And then the footage for the film where Steve Jones and Paul Cook, the drummer, go down to Brazil to find Ronnie Biggs, the great train robber, from I think it was a mail train robbery in 1963, and he escaped initially to Australia, I think. I think he had a sister or something that lived here before he went. He went to Brazil because there was no extradition treaty there, and he stayed there well into the 21st century. I think he went back eventually on some sort of agreement that he would serve minimal or no time in recognition of his advanced age. Anyway, they go and meet Ronnie Biggs. He's got no musical ability, but they record a song with him. Just watching that is pretty fascinating. I mentioned Sid Vicious before doing his unforgettable version of Frank Sinatra's My Way in front of all these people in this theatre with dinner jackets and evening gowns on, seemingly enraptured by his massacring of that song before he produces a pistol and starts shooting indiscriminately into the audience. It's just all so absurd, but strangely captivating. So at times, I think the film feels much less like a documentary and more just like a comedy made for people with very strong stomachs that are a bit twisted musically, or like me can remember some of that vibe, even though I was late to the party in the mid '80s. It's just a bit of entertainment, really. And that's what I found on this rewatch. I hadn't revisited this for probably 15, 20 years. I do think you definitely need an interest in punk music or being interested in that specific cultural moment for this film to really work. I think if you just try and watch this without any background or context, it's going to be a tough watch, and you're probably not going to. You're just not going to find it that interesting. But I think it does work as a fascinating historical document and captures, like what I said about England, in the mire that it found itself in the mid to late 70s. The British Empire had shrunk. I think they gave up their last port in Aden in 1971 from memory. They pulled back. World War II, even though they were the victors, one of the victors, financially it really hurt them. And they just couldn't maintain their empire. And the UK, by the mid 70s, there was garbage strikes. There was a 3-day working week. The economy was terrible. It was a pretty tough, bleak place to grow up. And that's what this punk generation displays in their music, in their fashion, just in their core beliefs. And a whole generation just rejected the culture that was available and made their own. And punk emerges directly from that frustration. Malcolm McLaren, for me, still remains a fascinating outsider. Or insider, depends how you take him. He'd like to paint himself as an outsider, but you can probably see him as just a very savvy Svengali, I think. Before the Pistols, he had a pretty interesting career in life. There's a band called the New York Dolls that are well known to people who like this kind of music. He managed them. He ran the famous London boutique fashion shop with his partner Vivienne Westwood. She's a famed she was a famed designer. It was called Sex in Chelsea, I believe. A lot of these people hung out in the shop and helped. Sid Vicious did. Johnny Rotten did. People from other bands as well, like the Pretenders, and I think Billy Idol might have been there as well. Anyway, he got into that scene, realized he could make money by exploiting these people to be in these punk bands. He later released music himself. He just constantly reinvented himself. He was a hustler, a disruptor. And I'm sure people like this exist just in a different way now, probably online somehow as influencers, or I don't know, but he seems like one out of the box. And I wonder now whether genuinely disruptive creative energy gets commercialized from the get-go before it ever has time to get dangerous like it did back then. And maybe that's what makes this period still so fascinating to me, is that for the couple of years that this stuff was around, it genuinely felt dangerous and people felt threatened by this, which is interesting when you look at it now. You think, how could they? But they were conservative times back then. So look, my final thoughts are that this film, for people people who like traveling in this lane or have got nostalgic touchstones to this period, this band, it's still quite entertaining. More than that, it reconnects me with everything I found fascinating about punk culture as a teenager, which is when you're meant to be interested in punk culture. The danger and the rebellion, the sheer unpredictability of it all. And I think whether you love the Sex Pistols or hate them, there's no denying that they represent a significant chapter in the course of modern music before it went to new wave a couple of years later, and then into hair metal and on to grunge. I'm not sure where we are now. I'm too old now. I'm irrelevant. I've lost touch, to be honest. So, but I think there for a brief moment in the late 70s, it looks as though chaos actually prevailed. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. It's available on YouTube if you're interested, and can recommend it if you're into this kind of thing. All right. Thanks as always for listening. See you next time.